Good morning. Good morning. I wanted to talk with you this morning about an article that I came across that I thought you might be interested into knowing this because a lot of times we talk about a lot of issues that go on in the world, and in our society and here in America. But I want to talk to you about this restaurant manager who forced a black man to work without pay, owes him more than $500,000 in restitution. And this is the court ruling. This is a court ruling. And I'm going to get into the biblical perspective of this. But right now, I just want to bring you this article. And it says Bobby Edwards, a South Carolina restaurant manager, was sentenced to prison for 10 years. A South Carolina man who was forced to work over 100 hours every week. Now, that's a lot of hours, 100 hours. I mean, 100 hours every week. And normally, when I was in supervision, on salary, I worked anywhere from 60 and sometime more. But if you go over that, there's a law, a labor law in place. And so for anyone to make anyone work over so many hours and not pay them is a violation of the labor law and a person, constitutional rights. And the thing is that Rite Aid, if you've heard of Thrifty, and Rite Aid bought them, they changed the name, they bought them. They actually was sued many years ago for making employees that were on salary work so many hours over the 60 hours and not pay them. And they thought they could get away with that just because you're in management and you're on salary. You can't make humans work over a certain amount of hours and expect to pay them just because they're on salary. Because, with salary, it's like there's really no set time. They give you a kind of a set time, but usually you can come in early, you can stay late, depending on the situation, and if they need you and there are situations or urgent situations or emergent situations that go on, or if you have staffing that calls off, that's all part of the factor of being on salary. And that's why they say be gentle, be kind, be compassionate to your supervisors and managers, because a lot of times you wind up working hours that you don't get paid for, because most of the time on salary, you do not get overtime on salary. Only hourly employees get overtime, but a salaried employees do not receive overtime. So anyway, this South Carolina man who was forced to work over 100 hours every week for years without pay and subjected to verbal and physical abuse was supposed to receive close to $273,000 in restitution after his former manager pleaded guilty. But that initial amount was too low, and appellate court ruled in April. The man should have received more than double that amount, and that's absolutely true. Because when you do that, you have to pay double. And so closer to $546,000, because according to labor laws, you have to pay like a time and a half or double that if you do not. It's double that if you do not pay. So like say you're supposed to take a break, an hourly employee is supposed to get their break and they do not get their break. Then you have to pay them for an hour that they didn't get their break or lunch, providing that they didn't get it. Not because they didn't notify you, not because they just didn't take it when you gave it, because they have a responsibility as the employee also to notify that they can't get it or some unknown reason. But if you just do not give an employee their break or lunch, they are entitled to an hour's worth of pay, an extra hour. And that's really true. So in my state, I know it's true in the state where I am at. So anyway, he was supposed to receive more than that double amount, closer to $546,000 from the manager to account for federal labor laws, according to the ruling. And that's what I'm saying. According to the ruling, the federal labor laws, you just cannot work people and not give them breaks or lunches. You cannot work them without pay, because you're going to wind up paying double when you do that. If you violate an employee's rights under the federal labor laws, you will be subjected to a higher restitution payment amount to the offended party. And so John Christopher Smith was forced to work at a cafeteria in Conway without pay for years. His manager, Bobby Edwards, pleaded guilty to forced labor in 2018. This is forced labor, and was sentenced to 10 years in prison for his abuse of Smith, a black man who has intellectual disability. So he also violated this man's rights when under the ADA, because the employee was disabled and he violated his rights. And so it says a U.S. District Court judge ruled in 2019, he ordered Edwards, who is white, to pay Smith around $273,000 in restitution, which represented Smith's unpaid wages and overtime. But the court erred in failing to include liquidated damages in the restitution, a provision of the Fair Labor Standards Act that would have doubled the amount of restitution Smith received, according to the April ruling from the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals based in Richmond, Virginia. The Fair Labor Standards Act liquidated damages provision holds that if failing to pay a worker's wages on time is so detrimental to that worker's minimum standard of living, then they should be paid double that amount. The Supreme Court decided in 1945. So we have to look at how people have still continually violated other people's rights, because this is a Supreme Court ruling that was decided in 1945, and people are still violating other people's rights even today, and there's laws that are already in place. And that's the thing, that we have to go back and look at these laws and dig them up. Sometimes they're hidden, and they could be hidden jewels for people that have been violated in so many ways. We have to be able to go back and dig through and dig deep to find these laws that are in violation of humanity, in violation of people's rights as human beings. And so when an employer fails to pay those amounts, the employee suffers losses, which includes the loss of the use of that money during the period of delay. The Federal Appeals Court said the district court will now calculate the new amount Smith is owed. CNN has reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office in South Carolina and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, which ordered the original restitution payment. So it's a violation also of this man's civil rights, because I said constitutional rights, but civil rights, too, because that's just not, good that happened to this employee who actually is disabled as well. He has some disabilities. And for this to happen, and we go back and we think about when people say, well, I wasn't born into slavery and that doesn't affect me, and all this other stuff I've heard people say. But this to me is like pure enslavement. If you ask me, it's pure enslavement to treat someone like this, to violate their civil rights, and to not pay them their fair wages under the federal Fair Wages Labor Act. This is all like, the Fair Labor Standards, Act. To violate this man in so many ways is just horrendous and just terrible. And so Smith endured years of abuse. And it says Smith started working at the cafeteria as a part-time dishwasher when he was 12. So he was very young, and a lot of people got jobs, especially black people, when they were very young and started working. And he was 12, according to the recent ruling. His first 19 years of employment there, when the restaurant was managed by other members of Edwards' family, were paid. But when Edwards took over the restaurant in 2009, Smith was moved into an apartment next to the restaurant and forced to work more than 100 hours every week without pay, according to the ruling. This is just plain evil. This man's heart is evil for this to happen, to treat any human being. I don't care what race you are, but any human being, the way he has treated this man. And he found a way to mistreat him, and he saw there were some disabilities and some challenges there, and so therefore he was able to get away with it. And it's so interesting how people think that when the mouse is away, they can play. When they think people are not looking, they can get away. But there is a God that's watching everything that everybody, including me, I'm talking about everybody, he's watching. He sits high and he looks low, and he is watching. And don't ever think for a minute that you are getting away with it. It doesn't matter if it takes 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. God is still watching, and there's going to be consequences for your actions. There's going to be trouble, and there's going to be trials and tribulations brought up on you for mistreating other people, for committing sin and misdeeds. And this man truly, this was atrocious. This man truly committed sins, misdeeds. He violated this man's civil rights. I mean, he did these things, he did that stuff, and he is going to face trouble and consequences for what he did. And he is now facing those consequences, because it says, and I'll go on, it says, Edwards affected this forced labor by taking advantage of Jack's intellectual disability and keeping Jack isolated from his family. So that's what abusers do. A real abuser and someone that's a real victim of abuse, that abuser, the perpetrator, will keep you away from your family, will isolate you from your family. And see, look what he did is he moved him in an apartment close to the restaurant. So now he was isolated from his family, and then he abused him. Not only did he do that, but he threatened to have him arrested. Look at that. And most black people don't want to be arrested. They don't want to have to face these white race soldiers. They don't. So that's right there within itself is manipulation at its finest. And he verbally abused him. This is in the ruling. Smith feared Edwards. So Smith was afraid of Edwards, who once dipped metal tongs into grease and pressed them onto Smith's neck when Smith failed to quickly restock the buffet with fried chicken. So he even tortured this man. Edwards also whipped Smith with a belt, punched him, and beat him with kitchen pans, leaving Smith physically and psychologically scarred, according to the rule. And that's so much abuse. This is truly a victim of abuse. Truly a victim of abuse. I mean, this is horrendous that this man did this to this young man, and he started working there when he was 12 and did all these things. When you go back and read stories about how slaves were treated, and when you look at this story, this is such a sad story, and it took years to get him, justice. But it goes on to say, but Smith also feared what might happen if he attempted to escape. He was enslaved. This man was placed into slavery. You can't tell me that he wasn't. He was placed into slavery, and it says what might happen if he attempted to escape. And this was CNN affiliate WPDE in 2017. And he says, this is what Smith is saying. I wanted to get out of there a long time ago, but I didn't have nobody I could go to. He told the affiliate I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't see none of my family. He didn't have a support system. He removed this man's support system. He took it away from him and refused to allow him to see his family. And it says, the ruling says an employee's relative alerted authorities of the abuse in 2014, and the South Carolina Department of Social Services removed Smith from the restaurant that year. We are talking about enslavement here, people. Enslavement. And so Abdullah Mustafa, the president of the local chapter of the NAACP, said at that time that there was some enslavement. And then CNN, of course, reached out to Conway, the chapter of South Carolina NAACP, for comment. That was truly enslavement. And I'm going to go right here because obviously Edwards is just an evil person. And he's just an evil, he's just an evil person. So I'm going to go right there. Such an evil person. And if you go to Leviticus chapter 19, verse 13, personal conduct. We see that a lot today where people are violating people's civil rights, constitutional rights, amendments, due process, all types of things. And they're getting away with it. And then they're allowing social media to sentence people and to convict people. And it's really sad. But when we go and look at the personal conduct, we as leaders, and even people, whether you consider yourself a good leader or a bad leader, whatever you consider yourself, I always say that a real leader is somebody that takes accountability and responsibility for their actions, and they treat people, with respect and kindness, and they show compassion, and they follow rules and regulations and laws that are going to help other human beings, not hinder them, not hurt them, not harm them. And always wanting to do the right thing and know that people have a right to self-determination. And he even took that away from this young man. He took that away from him. When he enslaved him and moved him away from his family and forced him into forced labor, and then start to beat him and abuse him into submission to make this man fear him. He took away his support system. His personal conduct was atrocious. It was wrong that Edwards did these things. And in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 13, it says, "Thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning." And also, I'm going to read 14. "Thou shalt not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind. Thou shall fear thy God. I am the Lord." And also 15, "Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. And thou shalt not respect the person of the poor, nor honor the person of mighty, but in righteousness thou shalt judge thy neighbor." Let me tell you something. This guy was doing unrighteousness. He used unrighteous judgment. Unrighteous judgment. This is in Leviticus chapter 19 under personal conduct. He also violated this man in so many ways because the man did have some disabilities, some intellectual disabilities. And he defrauded him. And your neighbor can be anybody. Your neighbor could be someone standing in line in front of you or behind you. Your neighbor could be someone that you see at the gas station pumping gas and you start talking to, interacting with. Your neighbor could be someone sitting next to you in church. A neighbor is a neighbor. And so for this man to defraud him of his wages, he robbed him of his wages, and he withheld them more than overnight. And he wasn't supposed to do that. And he did it. He placed a stumbling block in front of him. He refused to allow him to interact and associate with his family. This is wrong on every level, and this man deserves punishment. And really more than 10 years. If you ask me, he has to pay restitution. He violated his civil rights under the Fair Labor Standard Act because he was supposed to pay him for every time this man was refused his pay, and he probably didn't get any breaks or lunches. So of course they owe him way more than the original initial ruling. And I thank the Lord that God found favor, because don't you know that God will restore everything that the devil stole from you? We have to believe that God will restore everything that the devil stole from you. Everything. God will restore it. That's why my hope is in Jesus Christ, because I know that God can restore everything. When people mistreat you and steal from you and bring false allegations against you, and you know that they're false, God will restore everything that the devil stole from you. And when I did the video yesterday on 4 times fourfold, that you are to come forward and make it right, and if you don't, you will face trouble. And for people that have lied and took advantage of others and stole and made false allegations on people, guess what's happening to you? You are facing your own trouble. You are facing your own trouble. Anybody that has done wrong like that, that have done wrong and committed sins and abuse of others and violated their rights and lied on them and made false accusations. God is going to hold you accountable for the things that you have done. And God will do it in his time, but he's going to give justice where justice is due. I'm reading this article and I said, oh my gosh, we see that today play out on all these social media platforms and how people have lied on others and lied and made up false allegations and committed evils and sins and misdeeds and isolated people and lied so much now that they trying to even remove the support system of people that are being falsely held beyond prison walls. They've even tried to remove support systems. And you have people playing into that, human beings on social media trying to silence people and threaten people and attack people because they support a certain individual or they support a certain cause. And so they're trying to harm the people and attack them too for standing up for a certain cause, for what is right and acceptable. When I go back and read that article, I'm so grieved by that. And anyone that hears this video, I'm going to put the link in the comment section so you can go and read it for yourself. But we ought to be grieved at these type of things that's going on still in this world today. Besides killings, there's other issues that are happening to our own people, our own race of people. And it's so sad. This man deserves more than 10 years behind prison walls for the things that he's done to this other human being. Stole wages from him, beat him, isolated him from his family, threatened him, enslaved him, and forced him into labor and held him really hostage. And we think these things only happen overseas in these sweatshops. But it's happening right here in America, South Carolina. South Carolina. We have bigger fish to fry. My brothers and sisters, my friends and family. We have bigger fish to fry, and we need to bring these articles to the forefront. Bring them to the forefront. And right here, God often warned Israel. He warned Israel in the Bible not to take advantage of the poor, but to treat them with compassion and respect. That's a good leader. When you can lead people and treat them with compassion and respect. And make sure that they get their fair wages. And anytime there's an increase under federal laws and state laws, making sure they're notified appropriately and they get paid. And giving people their breaks and lunches and not trying to overwork people on salaries. This is atrocious. It is a lack of humanity. He took away this man's dignity. And he took advantage of someone that was intellectually challenged. This man's heart is not a heart of righteousness. This man's mind was not the mindset of what God would expect from us. To love everybody and treat others with compassion and respect and kindness. And I'm going to tell you something. When people say they're believers, because I hear that a lot about some people that say they're believers and they're sitting up here making videos, cartoons of others and talking about them real in a negative light and inciting violence and using harsh words and verbal and lying on folks and then using God in their sentences. But they're sitting up here citing stuff, but they're never prepared for the comeback or the downfall when others stand up for their rights in themselves and start to come back. They're not prepared for that. And I'm keeping it real. They're not prepared and they get upset and you shouldn't have said this. And that's harsh, but you cannot censor somebody's comeback when you're dishing it out. And as believers, when we fail to treat others with respect and kindness and compassion, you are going to have some comebacks. You're going to have trouble. You're going to have trouble, trials, and tribulations when you fail to treat others with respect and kindness and treat the poor and needy fairness will bring God's condemnation upon you. Because there are some people out here that feel like they got it going on way more than somebody else, and they start to attack them and bring them down. I seen it. I saw that. We don't have to mention names to know that there's people out here that have done that to other people that are supposed to say they're Christians and believers, that they have done things to people that were going through changes and transitions and they had a need and they interfered in that person getting their needs met. They put stumbling blocks in other people's way. And they interfered in people's livelihood. And still trying to interfere. But the word of God says, the word of God, I'm serious, people, but the word of God says that he will bring condemnation. These people that do that, believers, you are bringing condemnation upon yourself. It says it right here, will bring God's condemnation upon themselves. Upon themselves. Upon themselves. They're bringing it. It's not somebody else's fault when condemnation comes upon you. And you hear people blaming others. Why? You have to go back and look at your track record. Go back and evaluate what you've done. Go back and evaluate and know what you've done and look in the mirror. It's not other folks that's standing in that mirror. If it's you standing there, it's you. It's not those other people that you blaming standing in that mirror. It's you standing in the mirror. Pictures don't lie. See, people can Photoshop all day long, but a true picture of you standing in a mirror does not lie. So it's not others bringing condemnation upon you. It's you bringing God's condemnation upon yourself. See, can't nobody bring God's condemnation upon you. Only you can bring it upon yourself for your behaviors of unrighteousness, participating in sinful misdeeds and things like that. You bring God's condemnation upon yourself when you do that. It's not others. And nobody can save nobody else. Because I heard that, well, I tried to save them. You can't save nobody. You should be worried about and concerned about saving yourself. Nobody can save anybody. Only God can. And you should be concerned about saving yourself. That should be your ultimate goal each and every day that you wake up in the morning is how can I do better? How can I live according to the biblical standards? How can I live righteousness in the eyes of the Lord, and others will see my light so shine before men? When I wake up in the morning, my heart should be fixed on Christ. When I go to bed, it should be fixed on Christ. Even during the day, my heart should be fixed on Christ so that I can live according to the biblical standards that God has shown me and taught me, because the word says that you will bring condemnation upon yourself when you are a believer who fails to treat the poor and needy fairly. And there are some people that are in need. And you have failed, whoever you are. And when I use the word you, don't take it personal, because if it's not you, it's not you. But there's a lot of yous out there. There's a lot of yous out there that are doing these things. And they're proclaiming that they're believers in Christ. But the God I serve, if I'm doing those things, I cannot be the believer of Jesus Christ that most people know. He's got many names that people call him by, address him by. Master, sustainer, comforter, Jehovah Jireh, all those names. So if you are a believer in Jesus Christ, in God, in the biblical statutes and standards, then you have got to self-evaluate. And as you stand in that mirror, everybody should have a mirror, whether it's a little one. Everyone should have some type of mirror to look in the mirror and say, this is me. When I look in the mirror, I know it's me. I can't say it's my neighbor down the street. When my picture reflection in that mirror is looking dead, I'm looking back at that reflection. I can't point the finger outward when I know that it's me looking in the mirror. But I tell you that no one, most people that participate in evil doings and unrighteousness are never prepared for the comeback or the downfall that's going to happen to them and the condemnation that God is going to bring on them. That he's going to hold accountable. He's going to punish. There's trouble and trials and tribulations you're going to suffer and endure because of your unrighteousness. You bring it upon yourself. And you want to point the finger and say that it's other people. And all these other people did it. All these other people are doing it. You can't save nobody. You got to be concerned about saving yourself. You have to be concerned about saving yourself. You got to be concerned about saving yourself. You got to be concerned about saving yourself. It's a sin to do the things that I've seen people do. but they say they're believers. But they continue. And when folks ask you to treat them fairly, leave them alone, and you keep doing it over and over, then you play the victim. That's what I mean by people are never prepared for the comeback. Because you can't censor other people on what how they're going to respond. How they're going to respond. You can't censor them. Their response may be, you may think is harsh. But you can't censor somebody's comeback on what it's going to be. And all those people out here that have participated in other people's downfall and misfortunes and false allegations and stopped people from making money to feed their families, and now they're incarcerated and false allegations, all types of stuff. Don't be surprised when your karma comes to you, and you, because you're bringing condemnation upon yourself. Don't be surprised. See, this article, it's not just that article. We see people doing it day in and day out. And you have people laughing about it and thinking it's cute and funny when they're doing those things. And then when karma comes back, they get upset. They want to blame others. And all the while, they're saying they're believers. And we don't know the day, time, or hour that God's coming back for his people. But I'm going to tell you, there's consequences. And you bring God's condemnation upon yourself when you are participating in the unrighteousness, deeds, and mistreating people. Unfair. Not giving due process. Not paying people their fair wages. Placing stumbling blocks in front of others. Taking advantage of the vulnerable and the needy and the poor and a person's disabilities. All types of things. You bring condemnation upon yourself. And when you look in the mirror, you see yourself and not others. You can't blame others for the picture that you see, that reflection in the mirror. When you're out here participating in evil doings